Da skal vi ha et lite panel om Flying into the Future, og da ber jeg først paneldeltagerne om å komme inn på scenen. Ben Marcus fra AirMap, Espen Høiby igjen, kommet tilbake, og Brian Wayne, og så en fra UAS Norway. Jeg antar at det var deg da, Martinsen. Ja. Ta plass dere! Og fremtidens luftfart et tema for neste debatt, og den skal ledes av Jonas Stjernberg fra RPAS som Finland, som da tilsvarende UASN her. Nei, du trenger ikke den, du kanskje? Nei. Vær så god.
Okay, hello everybody. Välkommen från min del också, hälsningar från Finland på finlandssvenska. Vi har det bra i Mumindalen. And over to English now. It's an honor to be here. It's a spectacular event here in the Nordic. I was first really touching with UAS Norway when you arranged the first inaugural Nordic drone event at Svalbard in 2018. I was up there seeing the ecosystem, seeing the engagement, seeing the community, and also Anders managed to enthuse me to come over to Oslo also for this event. So thank you for that opportunity. We are going to talk about flying into the future. And before we head off into that one, I think it's important to recognize, as Espen said, people behind the business. So I'll ask everybody to introduce themselves, starting with Brian at the end.
I'm Brian Wynn. I'm the President and CEO of the Association for Unmanned Vehicle Systems International in Washington.
I'm Espen Høiby, CEO of Aviation.
Anders Martinsen, CEO, US Norway. And my name is Mats Sellström. I'm the CEO of the Swedish drone company Everdrone. We're sort of a drone company starting off developing technology and now transitioning into being an operator as well.
And I'm Oli Gikeo, Regional Sales Manager for AirMap in Europe.
I'm Rune Slambush. I'm Senior Researcher at NORS, a Norwegian Research Center, and I have a part-time position in one of our spin-off companies called Machine Prognostics, developing and selling condition-based maintenance solutions.
Thank you and welcome. And my name is Jonas Stjernberg. I am Senior Vice President at Robots Expert. We are a consultancy and expert company focusing on digital aviation, on unmanned aviation. Also the chairman for ARPAS Finland, which is the Finnish sister association to US Norway. And we need a test vehicle, so we have a drone operator, which I'm the CEO of focusing on demanding BVLOS long endurance operations. It's been said that aviation will change over the next 10 to 15 years more than it's changed over the past 70 years since the Second World War. There's several reasons for that. We have a congested IFR airspace. If you look at the route traffic in Europe today, 2018, according to Eurocontrol statistics, traffic grew in Europe by 3.5%. And you would think with bigger engines, more efficient engines, more digital tools, that the CO2 emissions would increase less. But that's not the case. They grew by 5.2%. And the reason for this is that the airspace is full with the current air traffic controller system we have in Europe today. It's too manually intensive. We need more and better digital tools. And now it's getting even more congested. We have the new kid on the block. We have the drones coming onto the space. That is increasing the requirements for more digital tools. So on one hand, we need to build infrastructure elements. We talked about U-Space today and UTM, and how can we do traffic management solutions that, if you listen to Espen, to have convergence in at some point in the future. We will talk a little bit about the infrastructure and connectivity. How can you connect not only drones, but general aviation and other aircraft and share the same information? If we're sharing the airspace, it's always a good thing to have the same opinion on where we are, who is where, and where we are going. But not only that, even ground-based operators, if drone operators connect to U-Space, what if you can't access the mobile network or you have a latency? I was sitting in Stuttgart airport and I couldn't connect. So how is that even in the cities? We have tracking technology We talked about ADS-B, we had second surveillance radar, which is used in manned aviation. We have mobile networks, but what if your drone is flying high or far and you don't have connectivity? How can we ensure that this is tracked? And urban air mobility, flying over people, flying with people, carrying people. There's a lot of infrastructure element. And the other thing we will discuss a little bit is use cases. So ever more specialized verticals, we have public acceptance, and we have security and cybersecurity aspects to deal with. It's a lot of elements, a lot of things that need to go right for it to be safe and to be cost effective. So with that introduction, kicking off into the digitalization of the airspace, 70-year-old technology, VHF radio talking to versus digit-savvy youngsters with wireless cameras flying around. Integration or separation? How can we manage this forward? Starting with Brian from the US perspective.
Well, I'm glad you asked me an easy question. This is a watershed moment in aviation. There's no question about it. I have the good fortune of sitting on a board of advisors for the FAA administrator, and I'm the unmanned systems guy there, but I'm also a member of the flying public, like all of you. I'm a pilot and aircraft owner, so I deal with my own level of certifications. And the thing that strikes me the most about where we are today is a conversation about, I'm going to pick up on what Espen just said. It used to be that the flight management system was in our head. And I literally sat through a presentation not too long ago about vulnerability of GPS signals and the reason why we haven't shut down all of the ground-based aviation yet, and we're not going to. And us pilots, we really need to practice our NDB approaches because if certain things go out, if we don't maintain them properly, we may be flying back courses again. If the localizers are still working. So we're taking this progress for granted. We shouldn't. We are in the process of transitioning to something that I think is going to be truly extraordinary and something that obviously I'm very excited about. But unmanned systems are not the only thing challenging the aviation. So the other new entrants like hypersonic, like commercial space and so forth. There's an awful lot, if you look at that, that futuristic view of how the airspace is going to be used, there's a huge amount of opportunity. But we dare not forget the fact that, we have to look at a whole bunch of things and continue to invest in a whole bunch of things just to maintain where we are. I completely agree that, that it's getting very congested. The other challenge that I'll just throw out there for aviation, the future of aviation, is that the growth in aviation today is in areas that have typically been underdeveloped. And how are we training those pilots? And are we transitioning properly from the old-fashioned, fly with one chancy radio, and fly an NDB approach to something that's highly, highly automated, where Boeing is taking one direction, Airbus is taking a different direction, how to integrate the pilot and the technology. So very challenging times, really a watershed in aviation history.
If we continue on the separation integration, I'm thinking about separation of manned and unmanned or integration. Mats, you represent a drone company, you operate in the CTR, currently in test cases. What's your view on this?
Exactly as you're saying, we need to do this transition from being operating in separated or segregated airspaces into an integrated airspace as well. And from the operational perspective in my business, we're always focusing on the next natural step. We don't come from a great deal of aviation background in my company. We're more from the technical side and software development side and so on. And as we see it, it's very much a crawl, walk, run methodology we need to apply. And then, of course, that's what everyone is doing in these testing scenarios and testing projects and so on. And for us, it's very much about integrating with the rules that currently apply. That's a starting point, at least. So what we're trying to achieve right now in Sweden and from our testing facility being inside a controlled airspace is to integrate with the ATC in a way you would do when operating with manned aviation. So declaring your takeoffs, declaring your flight routes, declaring your landings. And as Everdrone is very much focused on healthcare and emergency response, that quickly becomes a challenge, of course, because we want to get the alarm and then we want to be in the air within 5 seconds, but we can't really do that because we need to get a declaration from the tower. But it's at least somewhere to start. And the anxiety that Mark from Unify was talking about earlier, I think the way to overcome that is to continuously perform operations that are just a little bit more challenging than the previous one. And that requires time. And I think you need to have respect for that this needs to take time. We can't rush this and we can't push this technology to the market before it reaches the safety that is required.
Excellent. If we build on what Espen said earlier about, not willing to take out the last pilot out of the cockpit, and if we bring that to the tower, looking at Oliver here for a moment about the technology side representing AirMap in this discussion, a UTM technology vendor. If Mats wants 5-second clearance, after requesting it, how scalable is that if we have people in the loop, and can we give that authority over to algorithms to give clearance to fly? It's only easy ones today.
Yeah, it's not easy because I'm not even from the aviation, so I don't even know what it looks like in a tower. But obviously, I don't think it's scalable. Having a one-to-one communication between, because the scale of the drone operation are just going to be incredibly. And if we see, if somebody mentioned also the cost, the man cost in the ANSPs for handling, although. We will have to scale to so many air traffic controllers that I don't think it would be even sustainable from a cost perspective. To come back to your question about security, so I'm not from the aviation industry. I'm more coming from the technology industry. But what I realize sometimes is that I think there is plenty of space, airspace available, and sometimes what I feel from the aviation sector is that they feel concerned about having drones flying at low altitude, where usually when we are in the city or where we are in the rural environment, we hardly see airplanes. Just for emergency, if there is a fire, so yeah, there are some firefighters. So I believe there are still a lot of rooms to use the drones in the airspace, and I think until we reach to a really problematic and safety issues with manned aviation, I think it's going to take quite a long time because we will need a lot of operation to get to this risk level. But again, this is just from a technology standpoint background, not an aviation background. So maybe I have not this. But the change in mindset for me is obviously easier.
Espen.
Well, you mentioned the VHF, the 70-year-old VHF, and I think sometimes we should think about, and maybe I'm contradicting myself here, but some of the solutions that we've seen in the from the old days are actually working, because the VHF radio is instant, right? And we could at least learn from the processes. Go to Oshkosh once and see all the movements that are there in and out. And it's a lot more than you would see drones in the next few years in any city, I'll propose. And learn from that. Learn from the industry and then automate it from there. And so there are a lot of good things that had been learned in the 70-year history of commercial aviation. I think we should consider that. And after all, the reason why the VHF radio is still there, when you're close to the airports, is the fact that it is so instant. Otherwise, we are all computerized clearances now.
Sorry, Rune, it's a perfect bridge to the next question. I'll stay focused on you before I ask Anders to comment. On that note, so we have skilled aviators on VHF phraseology, and it's going really quickly. And if I'm listening to any of US tower traffic, and even if I'm quite fluent in English, I have no idea. And I have a VHF aviation radio license, by the way, but I don't have that fluency. So on the other end of the spectrum, we have recreational users, which are not regarding themselves as aviators. They're regarding themselves, okay, I'm flying a wireless camera that happens to be in the air, and I'm just concerned about getting the right shots. How far, Espen, can we rely on technology to bridge the skill gap between the multi-engine cleared experienced aviators and the recreational users?
Oh, that was a tough question again. Training is the key word to everything. Training is, and that's where I think that we have. If we look at the aviation industry, I think that one of the things that we should not learn from the aviation industry, how poorly they've trained pilots in the last years. There are too many mom and pop shops out there popping up everywhere. And that's what I'm a little bit afraid of in this industry as well. All of a sudden you'll see HOs or DTOs or whatever you call it in this part of the world popping up all over the place that are just producing pilots at a high speed without thinking about quality. And I think that the whole industry, because we see this in the aviation industry when we're missing so many pilots now, we're producing 35 pilots a day, we need 100. We need more women in the aviation industry, we need all this, but we need to also at the same time raise the quality of training. So don't fall into that trap when you set up training systems in your industry. Raise the quality of training, that's paramount for a successful future for this industry. And also for the what should I say, the guys working in the garden like Anders did, not so successfully, I would say.
He was trying to cut the leaves of the trees, I'm sure. But building on that over to Anders and maybe Rune also with the outside view, on this theme, you also said earlier that it was, three pilots, it's down to two, maybe going down to one, is due to automation of the aircraft, and we see drones starting from the automation, and they are, many people who don't know even how to do manual override. What do you think? How much do we need to invest in training? How much can systems and technology assist in keeping operations safe and cost effective?
I think there are many good points that needs to be highlighted to answer your question completely. One of the first one is that the result from Norsk Dronestatistikk yesterday, 2019, shows us that we have about 4,000 operators that are licensed to operate a drone. And we have about 459 or 457,000 Norwegian that has a drone or at least one. Then it says how many who is in the non-commercial side of this. And as many of them, as you were highlighting, saying that they don't consider themselves as aviators, and we make a joke about it, but for many of them, Just Culture is a rock band from the 80s. It means they're not familiarized with anything that is related to the ordinary communication from the aviation industry. So we need to completely address how we communicate with them, give them training and understanding of how to integrate into an already existing airspace that works very nicely and which is safe. So safety is definitely a priority for us, and I don't think we can rely only on the technology. It's something that we need to work on together with both the regulators, but also in terms of the manufacturers, and also the AI or whatever it comes from the drone now and in the future will enable and strengthen that message. But as a society, we have a responsibility to do this safely, because if we don't do that, we won't continue to see the growth in public acceptance, which we see is rising, especially in Norway. So there is a great willingness and wish from the audience, which is out there in the public, to see drones on the everyday corner, probably from real estaters to inspection and also search and rescue, of course, and police work, a firefighter, etc. That's like natural for us now, but it can very easily stop if we get either like an incident or there is a severe intrusion in the airspace, not only or conflict with the airspace, but actually a crash or something. So we need to be absolutely aware about this and address it long before something happens. And training is a part of that, and communication is essential in my mind.
How do you see this, Rune?
I might see it from a quite different perspective, but if you strip away the navigation, and I think this is key because in your introduction you said how could you synchronize with the ground vehicles, and if you strip away the navigation, maybe some of the AI and some of the VHF, and you look at other sectors like the maritime sectors, they've been working on this for, I don't know, a decade or so, and there have been systems tested up and running where you can control large fleets of ships to enter a busy area at certain times. So you plan the travel automatically ahead to be at the spot in the harbor when it's sort of your ticket, not busy. So all of this is done automatically. And they have sort of the same challenges with people paddling in kayak or other ships that they need to synchronize with. So I think that looking into other sectors, how it's been solved there might give some, at least some head start into going here. And I guess it's the same if you look at the automotive. Of course, the traffic is different, and it's much more complicated actually than in aviation because of the space. And you don't have all these unpredictable people flying around in the streets, in the air, not so many of them at least. And I think some of the technologies like machine-to-machine communication, now in the automotive industry, they developed this very low latency machine-to-machine reliable communication for the cars to communicate. And I think this type of technology can be key for the future.
Thank you, excellent points. Let's move focus over to business, where the money is and how value can be created for society and business and organizations. Brian, in GovU space, we've demonstrated a lot of use. We have international flight between Estonia and Finland at 4,500 feet. We've had common helicopters and drone cooperating for maritime search and rescue. We've been doing remote sensing at 1,000 feet for many hours. These are all possible to do technically today, but they don't scale until we get better tools. So which are the use cases and the verticals and the applications you think are pushing the envelope most aggressively? One thing to do a survey of a building site when you can do it VLOS, you're not pushing so very much. VLOS is probably enough. Who are pushing the boundaries of what is possible today?
Well, there's two layers to that come to mind right away. In terms of getting back to the public acceptance piece, which is going to be really important, the community that's pushing the use of unmanned systems the fastest is public safety. And that's a really, really good optical for the public. Public safety, we're using the technology to keep you safe. In terms of business cases, I think I'm paying probably the most attention to horizontal infrastructure, doing pipeline inspections, doing high voltage line inspections and the like. These are railways. These are all companies that recognize they can do this more efficiently if they can use unmanned systems and fly beyond visual line of sight. And they're complicated. Sometimes it's out in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes it'll transition different kinds of airspace. So we're seeing some of that now come into play, and I think it's really important that we pay attention to how those get regulated over time, because I think that'll start to give us a little bit more, the regulators a little greater comfort with the ability to do things that are more extended than certainly what's available in visual line of sight.
Mats, you've been pushing the boundaries into CTR, and you probably follow what's happening elsewhere. What's from a drone manufacturer/operator point of view?
I would say that the trend we're seeing, and at least should be seeing, is the trend of specialization. So some drone companies seem to think that the drone industry is just one homogenic group, and there's, as you said yourself, it's a huge difference between doing within visual line of sight inspections, for example, and then doing package delivery to someone's doorstep. It's two completely different industries, really, and you need to respect that. And in regard to pushing the envelope and pushing the regulations forward, I think that must be done in a way that still remains safe, in the sense that if we have an accident, it will be a big disaster for the whole industry. So it's everyone's professional responsibility to make sure that there are no incidents of that type. And there actually was an incident in, I believe it was in Taiwan a couple of weeks ago. It was a woman on the ground being hit by a model airplane, and she actually died. Yeah. And that's horrible. And if that, it wasn't precisely a drone incident, but it was very close. So, and if that sort of event would take place in a populated area in Helsinki where Google is flying, for example, or where Matternet is flying in the States or Switzerland, that would be catastrophic for the whole industry. So it's very much a shared responsibility to make sure that is not happening. So in regard to what type of applications we should look at, I think is either we should start with the low-risk applications at a higher volume, because that would build a lot of experience, or we should start with high-risk operations that have a huge beneficial value for society, but at a very low volume. So as a drone operator, I think it's sort of our responsibility to stay away from the operations that can be very attractive, but that include high risk and high volume. We should wait a couple of years before they go into that space.
Conscious of time, we'll get to the final question right away, and we'll take it in turn, starting with Rune. So with all of these wishes, the challenges, the opportunity, and the lack of money, if you were a dictator and you had a single wish you could make true for the future of growing unmanned aviation, what would that be?
For
Unmanned aviation, for promoting the industry, taking the next step.
yeah, that's difficult. I think
One.
it's to be a little boring. I think this UTM and what that develops into, I think that's will open up a whole lot of new doors.
Thank you. Oliver,
Good question.
you will all get the same questions. Start thinking.
I would say to have the whole industry collaborating. So because when I was first came to the drone industry, I had a lot of questions while they were asking to drones to be tracked and to be provide situational awareness. And then talking with general aviation, there were some general in some countries, but I think it varies from countries. There was no discussion about whether they should provide situational awareness or not. So I say, so they're putting the burden on the drones, but the general aviation, in fact, is not collaborating. So I think my wish would be that all together we need to collaborate in this U space or low altitude airspace. I think we will get the best benefits, most of the benefits from a good collaboration.
So people behind the business once again. Mats?
I'm going to take the easy way out here and go with these guys. So especially when it comes to UTM systems, because I think we have the tools and the technologies to really mitigate ground risk to a very large extent. But when it comes to air risk, there is a lot of tools missing. So UTM systems is really the key enabler, I would say.
Thank you. Anders?
For the Norwegian perspective, I would say we need an even stronger partnership and relationship with regulators and CAN and SP, bridging communication and technology to ensure the continuous work on safe integration. If we are considered as a safe industry, we won't get business.
Thank you.
Safety.
I'll come up with two answers, of course. The first wish is that when all the technology and integration, I think you have to integrate towards the aviation industry and not towards the ground. I think that's extremely important. Come up with solutions that are universal. Don't get a new Betamax VHF kind of a story. So make sure you find one solution that fits all. That's one thing. The other thing is that I hope that the unmanned aviation will be a part of recreating the dream of flying so we can enthuse more people to get into this industry.
Love that. Ryan?
I'm really glad I'm down the end this time. That risk be calculated proportionally and applied proportionally, and also be holistic. So there are certain things that we can do with this technology that remove risk, but generally from people that used to be hanging or doing, from ropes or what have you. That's not being calculated right now. It's sort of, are we doing that in a way that's 10 to the minus 9 in aviation terms, rather than looking at it from the standpoint of how we're actually removing a risk that might not have been aviation related in the first place?
Excellent comments. Thank you so much to the distinguished panels. The discussion needs to go on. We need to work together. I'll use this space to make a little push for the 27th and 28th of January in Finland, the next Nordic drone event First half day on Monday afternoon, drones at work at the work site. Second half, CO2 emission reduction from not just drones, but also from electrical aviation. We're going to have NEA, the Nordic Electrical Association there. We're going to have Wing presenting. We're going to have other distinguished speakers. And then how to increase CO2 carbon capture using drone technology for precision agriculture, etc. So be there, continue the discussion. Thank you so much. Good.